Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Finance and Audit Standing Committee for April 11th. And welcome also to the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. First on our agenda is motion to adopt the agenda. Moved by Doug, seconded by Susan. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. We have committee minutes to approve from November 8th. There's one little typo in there, which I gave Sarah last night. So is that fine?
Yeah.
You got it? Okay. Motion to approve the minutes from November 8th Finance and Audit Committee. Moved by Peter, seconded by me. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Any business arising from those minutes? Seeing none, this morning we have a delegation with us. So welcome to Kim Stegman-Lowe from Squamish Terminals, and also you're here with
John Shevchuk with Lex Pacifica.
I will turn it over to you.
Thank you for the opportunity to address Council and appear for the Finance and Audit Committee today. We've been here a couple of times before on the subject of Squamish Terminals' request for interim property tax relief. We appeared first in November and most recently in February. And we just wanted to provide a little bit of context today and answer any questions to the letter you recently submitted. So we learned at the February meeting that while the District of Squamish is in a difficult position in setting tax rates for 2017 across all property classes, that Council has kept an open mind to the possibility of providing some form of temporary property tax relief to Squamish Terminals. Squamish Terminals is facing a 61% property tax increase in 2017 in comparison to 2016 due to the rebuild of the dock that was destroyed by the fire almost 2 years ago to the day. Which, we can't believe, but it's 2 years since the fire, and here we are. Hi, how are you?
I'm good.
Mayor Heinzman. The dock rebuild was a necessary infrastructure replacement project costing tens of millions to restore the terminal's capacity. It does not result in increased revenue for the terminal, and we cannot pass along the tax increase to our existing customers. Furthermore, we are at a competitive disadvantage when comparing our tax situation with our competitors in the Lower Mainland. In effect, Squamish Terminals has been seeking interim annual relief in the amount of $236,000 to maintain its municipal tax at levels before the fire. In the meantime, we've been working toward permanent relief in the form of legislative amendments by the provincial government allowing for berth corridor improvement exemption. So today we present a letter in which we outline the basis for such relief, whereby we attempt to find a compromise that supports the District of Squamish in meeting its general property tax requirement and supports Squamish Terminals by ensuring fairness in property taxation and in recognition of its economic contribution to the District of Squamish. So in reviewing the latest draft financial plan for the District of Squamish, the 2017 general property tax requirement increase in comparison to 2016 is 6.5%, or about 1.6 million, at least that's what's been posted online, of which Squamish Terminals tax increase exclusively as a result of the dock rebuild represents a 15% contribution. And 20% when only looking at the increase in relation to 2017 new initiatives. From our perspective, this is an unfair burden on one of the district's largest private employers and tax contributors for more than 45 years. Although we believe that our property tax relief ask is reasonable and does not set a precedent for reasons already discussed in our prior meetings, we also recognize the difficulty you are faced with. Therefore, we've been trying to find a compromise, and we suggest a reduced temporary property tax relief to half of what we originally requested, to $118,000. We understand that there may be a variety of ways to accommodate our ask. John and Christine have been in discussions on what we're looking at ratios. So we did propose the tax ratio scenario, and in our letter we didn't provide a tax ratio calculation because we don't know the ratios, what they are for 2017. So accordingly, we're open to any ratios that could provide this relief. We further ask that this relief is only provided for a 2-year period, during which we will continue our efforts with the provincial government for legislative amendments. So there's an end in sight, it's just that we need some relief in the meantime. At this point, we just ask Mayor and Council, if you have any questions for John, Chuck, or myself that we can address before we leave.
Council.
Ted?
Yeah, thanks. The stuff to do with the province and why we're at a disadvantage in Squamish. How are we going to get that changed? How are you going to get that changed?
Mm-hmm. Sure, I'll let John speak to that because it's quite
There's
process.
a working committee in place already that has started to meet on changing the wording in the regulation that applies to birth corridor improvements so that the definition of property would include Squamish terminals, or expand that definition to include us in the regulation. That's what I've been told is the thrust of the discussions that are ongoing now.
So the province is doing that.
The province is doing that, and the committee that's looking at it apparently has already met at least once, maybe a couple of times, with the idea of trying to have it in place for 2018, is what I've been told.
Thank you.
Patty?
Christine, what would be the effect on our bottom line if that were to come into effect?
So
we
on our,
understand,
sorry,
this exemption, do we get sort of reimbursed for that exemption, or do we simply lose that tax base?
so to the chair, I'm not really clear because I haven't heard the same information back from the ministry yet, so they haven't talked about that specifically. But when I talked to Mr. Gillian at the ministry, he had indicated to me that at the time they didn't necessarily feel that the port property had fallen in the same classification as the birth corridor.
Yeah.
And that he would be very surprised if the ministry would be providing any further PILT or assistance. But I haven't heard of this latest working committee, so I'd have to follow up more with the ministry to see what that would entail.
As do I. It's been a couple of weeks since the last time.
Linda.
Through the chair, was the question, Mayor Heinzman, should this relief be given for the district what it does to our tax? That's like the percentage.
So I do have that further down in the slides as we go through, but I can sort of have a quick look.
Yeah,
And
so-
again, it's sort of, there's context around, it depends what council does with their ratios and the things that we're talking about today.
So just for council's information, the next agenda item is our discussion about our taxation review and how these ratios play out. And so John and Kim are here to answer any questions, but they know that we have a broader and bigger conversation to have next.
It wasn't really a raceway question. It was, they get this exemption,
So where are the taxes
where
coming
does
from?
that go?
Yeah.
And do we get made, like, will they be exempt and we therefore will have a deficit next year in our revenue?
Sorry.
Okay,
Not trying to get out this morning. So
let's
I can
say
talk
they-
to what they're requesting in terms of the actual reduction from our perspective. I can't speak yet to what the ministry would do and whether they provide us a PILT as an offsetting correction to
Okay,
that.
that was my question, so I don't know the answer.
Mayor,
That's fine.
I can't at this time either.
I'm just wondering what they do in other ports.
Well, under the Canadian port property, the federal government puts up the
Yeah,
bill.
okay,
Yeah.
so you don't know what provincial.
No, I don't.
We do know we're not the only ones seeking this.
That's right.
There are others.
Do you have another follow-up question?
Well, yeah, I mean, maybe this is to Robin. Can we be perceived as helping a business in this context?
No,
100% no?
through the chair.
I worry that if a business comes and they have a fire and they rebuild and their assessment goes up, I mean, I understand.
A business, yes. The port, that's a question that Christine's already
Yeah.
spoken to the ministry about. And it's not, we wouldn't give them 100% relief on all of their taxes, but in this instance, I think that what Ms. Matthews found out was that we're in a position that if we wanted to give some relief, we could.
But legislatively, we're.
Through the chair, there's a letter that I penned in 2016, gave out the legal basis for why I wouldn't be in assistance to business. And I think you've confirmed that on your own requirements.
Unfortunately, I believe the mayor was away for that meeting, but we did, it's under the Port Property Tax Act.
Yeah.
They actually do allow us to change the tax rates for the port.
took my mouth full.
Sorry.
You put your,
Long time. But essentially, if I understand it correctly, if we did that, we would really be changing the whole class, the mill rate for the entire class. And so it's not necessarily directed at one business, but there is only one business in that class.
So just for clarification, that's actually not true.
Oh.
Under this Port Property Tax Act, so we aren't allowed to aid business, but when another act intervenes then and overrides that and says we can. And this other act overrides and says that we can actually have a different rate class for the port than other class 4 properties, and that can be what we determine it to be. So it can go below the cap. And that was the Port Property Tax Act, and there's a clause in there. I'm sorry, I didn't bring it in today.
Maybe
but
section 3.
we had, yeah, there we go. We had originally looked at that to understand that we could have it at the cap without affecting the rest of the class. But when we went back in and reread it again, and we confirmed with the ministry and they agreed that we could do that.
So at the moment, we have one class 4 property. Wood fiber is not a class 4 property at the moment.
Right now, this is the only class 4 property for this role.
what's wood fiber's cost? What's wood fiber's cost?
They're not in that classification yet, but I think they must still be 6. I'll have to look.
Some kind of inactive status.
They have to be 6. That'd be the default.
All right. Any other questions for Kim or John before we move on? And you're certainly welcome to stay for the rest of the conversation.
I think you have a lot of topics to cover. But happy to answer any other questions. We appreciate your time, and we recognize that we're in your hands, and hopefully we can find a win-win. Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And to assure council, I will bring you back to this, but I would like to go in steps just because you need to settle on some ratios and things before we can ascertain what this impact would have to you.
Thanks for coming.
Bye-bye.
Okay, with that, I will turn it over to Christine now. Christine's got a presentation to sort of walk us through the property tax review.
We will try, yes, thank you very much. So Christine Matthews, Chief Financial Officer, and today we are here to talk about the financial plan and specifically the property taxation, and to talk to council's philosophies around how you would like to proceed with a property tax bylaw. So the key thing today, some of the key goals today, we want to review and consider options for property tax rates and ratios. And we're looking for some direction back from council as to how you would like us to prepare the tax rates bylaw. Today also, we're very fortunate to have received a $1.14 million water grant. It was ahead of schedule as far as we're concerned. We were planning on that being for the 2018 financial plan year. It's come earlier, which is great. Unfortunately, $1.14 million is a significant impact on our financial plan and does require an amendment if council wants to proceed. The expiry date on that grant being March 2018. So unfortunately, we do have to make some room or adjust work plans if we want to get that in for the current year. So we'll talk to that today and just get council's direction if it's okay to proceed with the amendment to the financial plan. And then after our taxation review today, I think the whole point of bringing the taxation review back today was council did have some concerns as to how that was going to fit based on our financial plan. So I'll just revisit with council and make sure we're still comfortable to proceed with the financial plan. So heading right into property tax rates and ratios. Oops. Okay. We do finally have the BCAA completed, or sorry, we had originally done our property tax information to you based on the completed roll. We have now received the revised roll. We don't have all of the other impacts from the other agencies yet. Those will continue to trickle in into April, but we can start to look at our own impacts on the taxation. And it's not surprising that, not really surprising, but we will talk to what has happened from the completed roll to the revised roll. And essentially for those people that are kind of wondering, well, it says completed roll, that means completed roll. It doesn't actually. The completed roll goes out. Property owners have an opportunity to determine if there's errors or corrections and go to the park panel. When they do that, sometimes those taxes do come down. And so the revised roll is the final one that will be affecting 2017. And then after that, supplementals would be added to the rolls there. So, what does it all mean? So we came out of the financial plan with a tax requirement of $26 million essentially. And that was an increase of 1.578-ish million. And that was a tax revenue increase of 6.46%. And that's what that's the term we kept using and kept banding around the council. However, how that gets distributed is the question today. And we have to take into account that the assessment base is growing. So in theory, there's a bigger assessment base to spread that increase over. The assessment base increase was $1.6 billion from over last year, very big numbers, and overall an average of 38%. So that's pretty scary when people get their assessment bills, and we don't want to make light of that. That is scary. Does that automatically mean your tax bill is going up 38%? It should not. So, and I say that, there will be increases for sure, and how those increases hit people will differ. But it shouldn't be 38% or worse. And in fact, when you consider that we're going up 6.46% in terms of revenue need and a 38% assessment base need, some people might actually be thinking it's going up about 44%. And again, the answer to that is no, it's not. So take a deep breath on that one. Having said that, is there going to be a tax increase? For some of the classes, there would be. And we'll work through today what that looks like, and it will depend on how much you distribute to those classes, how that impacts them. So just for our public at home, how do property taxes work? I think everyone around this table has a pretty good idea of it, but for any viewers that might be looking in, essentially we take whatever the assessment value is on your property, we divide that by $1,000, and we multiply that by whatever tax rate we have set for that property class. What is a ratio or a multiplier? It's essentially the relationship between another class and class 1. So class 1 would be 1, and if the tax rate for business was 3 times that, then the ratio for business would be 3 to 1, essentially. BC assessment determines the assessments, we do not. However, the taxing agencies determine the rates, and for us in particular, we determine our own rates, whereas the other organizations essentially, we use provincial set ratios for that. So what are the risk factors from assessments?
Can you just describe for everyone what the other taxing entities are?
Sure. So we also tax for the SLRD, our regional government, our regional hospital district. We tax for the school taxes for the province. We tax, and included in that is police taxing.
I'd like to, we're collecting for them.
We collect for them, correct. We just collect and flow it through our organization to other entities. We also collect for BC Assessment Authority. It's actually quite a small rate, but we do collect a small amount for BC Assessment Authority, and also for the Municipal Finance Authority, which assists us all with our borrowing. So, what are...
I need the answer.
I know. Some of the risk factors from the assessment side. So BC Assessment. So this is outside of your control, Council. This is what comes from BC Assessment. And some of the risk factors that can be handed to a property owner, if they make any improvements to their property over last year, that can be a risk factor because that could raise you higher than other properties in your area. So if you put in a secondary suite, and a lot of properties are putting in secondary suites, that could have a significant increase on your property value, and that would affect your assessment. The neighborhood market value in relation to other neighborhoods can shift. So where one neighborhood might have gone up a couple years ago more than another, now those other neighborhoods might be catching up, and we're seeing some stress on some of our downtown areas, our Valley Cliff areas, some stress in Brackendale, as they start to catch and move up that market range, and not necessarily in relation to some of the other neighborhoods. If you had a recent sale in your neighborhood, so all of a sudden nothing had sold in your neighborhood for years, right? All of a sudden you have a sale. that sparks the reassessment of market value for BC assessment. And now they have comparatives in your neighborhood that are higher, and all of a sudden you'll see your assessment go up. If you have a lower property growth in your class, so when we go through all this, you might find that actually residential or one of the market classes actually had negative non-market change. They actually went down, there was fewer properties, or in some cases we didn't have the same growth in one class as another, then that could impact, because the base that you're being assessed on might be smaller than another area. And then there's the property class change. So if the use of your property changes from, say, a business to a light industry or back and forth, that's the one we usually see it sort of going between those two. Or if a portion of your residential property now gets assessed because you're doing a business in your home, and now a portion of that is being assessed as a business component, you can see that that would have an impact on your assessed value as well, and which class you fall into. So those are things we can't control. Those are coming from BC assessment. And I don't want to make light on this. We have a lot of really volatile assessments this year, and I think that's why we're all sitting here today, is that we have concerns about that for our public. Some of the things we control the amount of overall tax revenue needed. So we just spent a considerably long time. Essentially, we started our financial plan in June. We're still doing it today with our final amendment, hopefully our final amendments. And we are, but we've been working really hard to try and make sure that that tax revenue increase is not too big for the overall complexion of our community and what we're trying to do. Having said that, though, we're trying to balance that with strategic goals that we need to accomplish. Aging infrastructure. We're trying to maintain and increase services for new property owners coming into the municipality, and there's a lot of growth. So we're trying to balance all those things and keep that tax revenue need at a reasonable level. And the other thing that we control is how we distribute that tax revenue amongst the classes. And that's really the goal of today, is to try and make sure that council's comfortable with their philosophies as to how each property class will be impacted by that distribution of tax revenue. So, the approach. How do we do that? So last year we talked a lot about tax philosophy, and we sort of got to the point where we were talking with council about the fact that it's all very good to be concerned about BC averages. They matter, it's important, but really we had to do a made in Squamish approach. And what we really want to do is, what is our philosophy? What matters to us? What are we trying to do with our ratios, and what makes sense in the context of the services we provide and what we do? And so last year we started to work towards having a fixed ratio approach. So very specifically, we would say that we wanted business to be 2.81 as a ratio or multiplier on residential. We wanted light industry to be 3.81. We're going to go back and revisit those today, but from up until today, I've been basically carrying on with those assumptions to give you some idea of how things are working and what that means to single family average, or the average single family home and things like that. So that's the approach I've been taking. And what that approach means is we take the 2016 assessment values and rates, and then we apply what I keep terming for you guys as the effective rate. What do I have to increase those by to make it all come out with the number we need at the end of this calculation? And so with the revised roll, that's 5.34%, okay? So I actually have to lift all that, 5.34%. Then we take the yield from that, with the revenue yield that we would get from that, and we divide that by the 2017 assessment value for that particular class before non-market change. So we basically say, comparing apples to apples, if we took last year's base to this year's base before growth, what would we need those rates to adjust to? And then we take the residential one, and we say, okay, and now we want to still apply our fixed ratios. So we do that with the residential, and then we take that rate and we put all our multipliers against it to come out to the rate for business and light industry. So that's how we do it. And then we apply the non-market change for each class on top of that with that same rate, and we come out magically to the 2.6, or the $26 million that we need. Okay? Easy. Easy. Okay, so why did that go down? Because I used to talk to you about 4.4%, effective rate being 4.4%, right? Well, the overall assessment went down 7.4 from where I was talking to you about before. It went down quite a bit more, but we knew about one of the errors in the assessment roll early enough that I was able to factor that in. We went down another $7.4 million from there, okay? So that starts to impact what happens. In addition, there was the 20.4 million at the time, we only had the non-market change as it was worked out before the error. So when we actually run through, apparently a lot of that error was to do with the non-market change component. So that's shifted. So we went from 4.92 down to 3.9%. So with all those things in mind, we did have a change in that effective rate that we've been touting out and talking to you about. Okay? So, but it's interesting, because I want you to look really carefully at the bolded items in particular. So it says the 4.4% increase over last year's assessment before non-market change. And then the residential, what it basically indicates is that if you took last year's rate and we take that, you remember when I take the 2016 yield and I divide it by the 2017 assessment base, the tax rates drop, okay? And they dropped 22.83%. So you did see tax rate decreases, just to assure the public, we don't just automatically keep last year's rate, add it to the ratio and make a nice big number. We actually adjusted that tax rate down. The average single family residential at that time, with based on the completed roll, was just under $800,000. It's crazy, isn't it? It's difficult, yeah. And then, so that was about a 37.75% increased assessment value on the average single family home. Now we've heard stories of higher and we've heard stories of lower, and this is what we're going to talk to you about today. It's like Peanuts Wild Ride, to quote a mountain bike ride, trail, right? It's all over the place, and we're going to talk to that a bit today too. When the smoke cleared, that single family property is paying $143 more over a year, about $12 more per month to support your financial plan, okay? Business actually reduced. So they're paying less than they did last year, according to this average, okay? Now again, businesses might be impacted differently depending how they were assessed, but when we look at the averages for the class, business went down. Compare that now to the revised roll. Our increase went up 5.34%, but that's because we no longer have that non-market change being added. It's lower now, so we had to increase the effective and bring our tax rates back up to 22.69, or not back up. It's still going down, but it's going down to 22.69% now. Your average single family now is calculated slightly different because the class went down, so now your average is 798. But still a 37.5% increase. But look at, you're still paying $143,000 increase in tax. 140. All right, so many zeros. I'm up to the billions now. I can't keep track of them all. And under the revised roll, business is actually reduced to $206 per year. Okay? So if we approach everything the way we did last year, this is where you'd be at. Okay? And just to throw up all those things that you guys are used to looking at, how this looks for all the different class averages, you can see that actually the residential is going up 4.49% and $88 over the year. It's only the single family residential that's going up 143, and because they have much higher assessment values, and 5.6%. The port property, you can see why they're here. Ouch. Now granted, a lot of that is non-market change for them, right? Because otherwise their rates actually would have gone down. But they have a very massive non-market change. And then you can see all the other classes, they're all going down. Okay? So there's been enough growth, there's been enough things generated, and the way our ratios are set, we're actually shifting the burden more to residential under our current scenario. Okay? Which I believe was still in keeping with where council was somewhat headed. And that's why I landed on this one of all the scenarios I ran. I came back to this one. And I'll talk to you about some of the other scenarios I ran so you know why I kind of came back here. And the comparison to the BC averages. I mean, there's been a lot of emphasis on the ratio and the concern that the business is over the BC average ratio. But if you actually look at the BC average rates, we are below them. Okay, so assessed value times the rates, we are actually below. And that is true. You can see if you look down that, run down that rates column, we're pretty well below for everybody except our utilities.
Yep,
Just on this slide here, we're at 2% on port and the rest of the province is at 8%. And that doesn't kind of fit with what we just talked about.
Sorry, which of the two? Oh, those are burdens. Burdens, and it's for major, it's not just port, it's major industry for everybody. The other thing, I want to make a caveat though, okay? Because I'm comparing you to BC averages, but I only have the BC averages for last year. So I want to be fair because, of course, you know how ours went down, right, with the assessment lifts. So we don't have 2017 BC averages because, like us, every other municipality is trying to set their tax rates too. Okay, so you need to take these, always you need to take these stats with a little bit of a, we don't know what's going on in other municipalities, we don't know how, we can only really deal with our own municipality and what's going on for us when we look at these things. But we bring this metric out every year, so I brought it out again. You can see that the burden, we're up to 65.5% going to residential. And that's going to be your burden down the left that were the numbers that Councillor Pryor was honing in on there. So that's the, what portion of taxes does that class take care of? Are we okay to move or did you want to?
Patty? This is a hypothetical question. Has the province ever talked about creating more than one residential class so a municipality can set a different tax rate for a single family home versus condominium or that type of thing?
So they actually break it down that way. We actually can break down all the different values. And there are different strategies. I'd have to see how it impacts into class 1, like if they'll stratify class 1 that way, but you can do phased averaging. There is a thing under the agreement that you can do neighborhoods. I believe you can break it up through neighborhoods. We haven't explored it a lot. It's fairly complicated. I'm not sure if anyone in the province is doing it right now, but there are things in the legislation that would allow us to go there. I don't think we could go there in time for this year. We have to explore it.
It's a curious question. I didn't think there was something in the legislation, and if it's not clear enough, then maybe, I'm not sure if UBCM has ever considered the resolution that
I don't know.
would be an interesting debate.
I'd have to go and explore it a lot more. I'm not going to pretend that I know a lot about that section. I believe it's called the phased averaging section, but it allows you to kind of look at neighborhoods and assess class rates differently amongst the neighborhoods, but I'm not sure. I'd have to read the legislation a lot more to see if it would allow us to stratify into, but you might be able to accomplish a similar thing by hitting the neighborhoods, I'm not sure. But it is complicated, and I'm pretty sure it requires bylaws and probably some kind of public processes and things to get there. So
I was thinking more housing type as opposed to neighborhood.
Yeah, I'd have to look at it more. I really don't know that answer.
Any other questions at this point, Councillor? Yeah, Doug.
So the effect of this, taking from last year to this year, is we have lowered the mill rate because all the various classes have gone up in assessment value. Residential, commercial, light industry, and even the class 4. We have lowered the mill rate a certain amount because we don't want to just raise taxes 38% or something like that. In residential, light industry, business and other, which I guess is commercial, but we didn't change the mill rate in port. That's more or less the effect of all this.
Correct. That's essentially the effect of this. That's right, because the port was at the capped rate of 27.5, they're the only ones not getting a reduction. And so that's, again, we'll bring out the modeling, we can bring out the modeling later so you can see what we could essentially do there if council has an appetite.
But they haven't gone down to go up. So.
Well, I understand that, but nevertheless, that's where they are, and so that one has not been adjusted. I guess utilities probably not as well.
The utilities, to be honest, they don't get a really fun ride in this either, no. But in other years where everybody was going up, they got to stay more stable too. So it's, So just to give you some comparisons, though, for last year, in 2016, the residential burden was 64.5%, whereas now it's up 65.5% by maintaining that, what I'll call stable ratios. And business was carrying 24.7 last year, and they're dropping down to 22.8% now. And the port was carrying 1.6% last year, and now you can see they're carrying 2. Light industry also carried 1.6% last year, and they're now at 1.5. So then we always talk about averages, and I always say, well, they're averages. What does that really mean? What does it really look to property owners? So we take what we hope is a representative property from each of the various neighborhoods, and we actually run them through with that philosophy. And as you can see down in the second box in that grayed area, the change in dollar can be very significant across the various properties. Council, what I need to tell you today is I don't think you can bring the tax revenue down low enough to not have some of these properties have to deal with this market lift. I ran other numbers, and it is still volatile. It still sends some up into these, and again, percentages are not always very telling. But in this case, the downtown is probably going to see a hit. No matter what you do, they're going to see a hit from this assessment value. A lot of improvements in the properties downtown. You're seeing market, they're kind of coming into being that affordable range, so there's a lot of market pressure on those areas now, a lot of demand. I'm just not sure you're going to be able to stabilize that, and I guess that's the point of this slide, is it's going to affect everybody differently. We talk averages, and that's really all we can talk, because you couldn't do this for every single property in your folio. But some people are going to be upset. Their taxes are going to go up. Some people are going to think, it wasn't that big a deal, Maybe the Highlands is feeling like, okay, whatever, it went up another, something. But yeah, some of your neighborhoods are going to be feeling it. And same happened last year. Last year I think the pressure was more in Valley Cliff, right? And we saw that go through last year.
So is it safe to say that if the average in the community went up 38%, 39%?
In market value.
Then a lot of the homes in Garibaldi Highlands will actually have reduced taxes. A lot of the homes in downtown Paradise Valley will go up exponentially more.
I think it's fair to say that everybody's probably in the residential area is going up a little bit because we're shifting the burden by maintaining the ratios. So
unless they're significantly under the average.
Unless they're significantly under the average. So what this is indicating to me is that the Garibaldi Highlands will still see a small increase. It just won't be to the magnitude that you're seeing in other neighborhoods. And then you can see our business on Cleveland actually has a bit of a tax break going into it.
I must not be reading this right. So the 2017 municipal tax, based on the numbers along the top there, that's how much taxes people are paying, like in the estate or in the Highlands? It's
For the municipal portion, right? We
average
assess
home.
other agency taxes on top of that. That's why that might not look like your bill at home
Yeah,
when it
okay,
comes.
Of
well, you're talking,
the average home.
yeah, the Valley Cliff or downtown's going up $300. I mean, there's other things that are gonna increase on top of that?
Well, not from us, but there'll be residential. Our library actually went down a little bit, so that'll help a little bit, but it's
Yeah.
such a small assessment. But then we don't control school, SLRD, hospital.
SLRD is going up a lot.
And SLRD, it looked to me, I just got that paperwork, and it looks to me like between the hospital and that might be going up about 10%.
I've been doing this, this is 5 years I've been doing it. I still have a hard time with the taxes. So I'm thinking BS baffles brains. So will we get the slide that shows the amount all added up, what the tax increase is going to be from last
We
year?
will, but I can't show it to you today because I don't have
Yeah.
it. I could only show you based on last year. I do have SLRD and I do the hospital district now, which I could, if you wanted to take a break later, I could crunch that through quickly for you. I just did a very quick eyeball, like on Sunday night, kind of, where are we at with that?
you
And
know,
it looks like SLRD and hospital together are going up a little bit in terms of how it's impacting. And again, we're dealing with percentages, so what that means on a dollar value.
Yeah, the SLRD is going up quite a bit. I thought it was like 18% or something, but it's only $20.
18% of a small number.
Yeah.
And that's where the joy of percentages, right? They are tough to read sometimes, and sometimes you have to just go back and go, what is it in dollar value? What does it really
It
look
only
like
means
in dollars?
$20 or if that, but it's actually.
Ted, are you?
well, I
you
mean,
have
you
full
know,
budget?
what I'm waiting for is the big number at the end, I guess. Combined number.
So I think for the direction we
What
need
what
to,
are the taxes gonna be? Like, I mean,
Average home in Garibaldi Highlands is $3,290.
32 plus all the other stuff,
so,
yeah.
So
You know,
Ted, I think what-
I look at 3290 and I think, wow, that's cheap.
so I think what Christine is saying is that we won't have those numbers today.
No, I know.
Um, So we can only control what our ask is.
Well, that's not bad.
Okay.
$100.
So what are some of the other approaches I looked at, ran through the models to try and, you know, land on this one, back at this one, which I think closest fits council's philosophy. And we can still tweak and look at that, but I think that sort of fixed ratio thing probably got the closest to what council was trying to achieve, but let's talk it through. One of the things I did need to mention is I did run through, because the library is actually going down, our debt is falling off for the library, so between this year and next year, the library assessment will actually disappear. So last year, we actually put through the model ratios for business of 3.82 and ratios for light industry, ratios for light industry at 3.82, and then ratio for business and what's the next one down? Class 5, we put through at 2.82, and then the others were 1-to-1 with residential. So that's what we actually put through last year, because we were trying to stabilize it and make sure it shook out when the smoke cleared with the library at 3.81 and 2.81. So this year, because the library's gone down, I actually ran 3.81 and 2.81 through our model and come out the other end to basically still land at 3.81 and 2.81 when both assessments are included together. So that's what I've done. If you don't like that, then we could change it back to the other, but I've gone with the idea that we're trying to get to the 3.81, 2.81 concept. We also tried to use, so that was one. So that basically all that did was change that effective rate a little bit. It brought it down to 5.24% because now you're spreading it over the other classes a bit more. And again, the tax rate went down for the residential 2.76%, and it basically made a $2 difference on the average family home to go with 3.82 and 2.82 instead of 3.81, 2.81. People are looking a bit confused. Did I lose you in the translation?
Council, you good?
So remember on this slide back here, where we have the ratios. I'm actually seeing this light industry coming out a little bit low, but see, we've got 3.8, 2.81, 2.81, 1.11. Those are the ratios that we have right now. 3.8 for the light industry is actually 3.81 on the municipal, but the library's equalizing it back down to 3.8. So if I ran the same thing that like last year when we sat here and we played with the model and we said, we're happy with 3.82, we're happy with 2.82. But what came out the other end after library was 3.81, 2.81 as the final ratios. Okay, so I used those final ones this year and ran those through the model because the library had gone down a bit and it more closely came out to what it was last year. Or I can go back and I can run 3.82 and, okay, minor detail, but one of the scenarios we ran. Okay. The other one is no fixed ratio. So we don't try and hold the ratios fixed. We just say if we're going to do it for residential, we're going to do it for everybody. So when I went through and I said, what's 2016, right? What would 2016, and I increase it all by that magic percentage, whatever that percentage shakes out to get me the $26 million out the other end of the model. But instead of using last year's ratios, I just take every yield and divide it by the new 2017 rate, assessment value before non-market change. So basically, whatever I did for residential, I do it for all the classes. What happens then? Well, it starts to shift the burden back away from residential, because now your other rate classes are taking more on again. And the light industry goes up to a ratio of 4.02, business goes up to 3.09, forest went to 3.45, and recreation went to 1.69. I didn't feel like that was what council had kind of directed us to do before, so I stepped away from that, but we did run that scenario. Okay? And in that case, the average business actually goes up, and light industry actually goes up. So they share the burden of the tax increase.
But, so, and just to make the point, where's the port in this scenario?
The port stays the same because it's on a capped rate right now. So it stays at that 232 through all these scenarios unless we play with their tax rate.
To make that point, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, what if we wanted business at the BC average ratio? So, and again, last year's ratio, because we don't know what this year's is yet. And we brought it down to 2.62. We would need an effective rate, that sort of multiply all the rates by, at 7.17%. So adjusting business actually has a fairly big impact on how it hits other areas, because of course it is actually quite a growing area and there's more properties involved. So the tax rate would only reduce by 21.34%, so all the other tax rates would go down 21.34%, but business would go down 26.67% tax rate. So the average family then would be paying $190 per year and about $15.83 per month. The average business would have a $531 reduction. And residential burden would shift even more into the residential, 66.7%. So again, I looked at that and I kind of thought, well, I don't think council's looking to burden our residential with that volatile assessment more. So I stepped away from that ratio and brought you the other one again.
Thank you for running that.
Yeah. And then what if we wanted the average single family below 5%, right? So we wanted that magic single family $800,000 property to not go up that to 5.3 or to, sorry, 5.6. We wanted it to come down. The only way we can really get there, from what I could run with the ratios stabilized, was to actually, we have to go back in the financial plan and we have to drop it. And so a 1% drop in that would bring you back down, and 1% drop is about $260,000, and would impact the average single family. Instead of paying $143 a month, they'd pay $114 a month. Instead of paying $12, or sorry, a year, and instead of paying $12 a month, they'd pay $9.50 per month.
Is that extra?
That's the increase.
Less than that.
Increase over last year. And the business reduction would be $276. And if we wanted to get both of those, because that's kind of what I heard back from council when they were concerned, right? Business ratio and the 5%. So I ran them both, and you need to take about a 2.5% drop in your financial plan. That would increase the 2016, the effective rate would need to be 4.79%. And when the smoke clears, basically you'd be going from $143 down to $129 per year for the family, or basically from $12 to $10.75. And the business reduction would now be $664.
Yeah, Doug.
So do we not have a policy concerning these ratios? I've heard reference to it previous years, and I don't by memory think it was part of our long-term financial plan, but I think we've had policy about the commercial being something like BC average, for example. In light industrial, I thought was somewhere the same. We've had that, I think, for a number of years, but is there an existing policy?
So we actually had the long-range financial plan policies drafted up by Urban Systems, and we've been essentially using that. It was business was at the time was about 2.74%, and that was the actual target built into the document. We bring that document back to council every spring, and last year we talked about it as we set the ratios last year. And essentially we backed away somewhat from that policy. Our staff is supposed to bring you back and actually put those long-range policy ideas back into a more formalized policy. But that was one of the things that council kind of stepped back and went, okay, we want to, last year we looked at the policy or the ratios and we said, I think we should probably stabilize them a bit more. Instead of going up and down with ratios and having everything capped, it was kind of making everything really difficult to chart through. So we stepped away from that somewhat last year and we included that description in our financial plan because that's where we legally have to state the policies, is in the financial plan.
Does that help them?
Yep. So in other words, it's been,
We talked about it going into this season, we talked about it last year, and we decided that they were good ideas to follow, but that really having, some things capped at rates, some things capped at average ratios was really causing a lot of unknowns in our tax rate setting. We couldn't get any kind of consistency with what we were doing because, of course, BC averages change all the time.
but are they that volatile? I mean, for example, take the commercial, which used to be about 2.7 times the residential. Is it bouncing around that
Well, it's
much?
gone to 2.62, and you can see what a stretch that would be for us. That would mean quite a bit of burden shift into residential if we tried to follow that. The other thing that we had was we had a blend. So we had some things set on BC average ratios, and we had some things set on rates. So the light industry was actually set on rates, and as you can see, we're comparing now to rates that probably this whole province has gone down in rates because the BC assessments have gone up all over. So rates become very volatile. I don't like chasing rates. I try to avoid that. And that's why I kind of said, why don't we make a maiden Squamish philosophy around our ratios and try and work with that? Because that's really what we control. It's our philosophy around how much, how are we going to share the burden in our municipality.
Keep going.
So if our philosophy is not to stick to BC averages, how would you state our philosophy?
So basically, I say that we have basically a set ratio. We do look at the BC averages, we use it as a guide, but we look at the ratios, not at the rates. So we're always looking at the ratios. But we've gone to the multipliers, so the factor against residential. Do we need to clarify ratio?
For me, at least.
So ratios are the relationship to the residential class rate. So if the residential rate is sitting at 3.38, you can see that light industry's 12.87 as a rate. That is a 3.8 ratio to residential. You have to multiply the residential 3.8 times to get to the industrial rate.
I get that part, but so our philosophy then is built around our ratios between 5 and 6 versus 1. Our philosophy then is light industry should be 3.8 times residential, and business and other, which is the commercial, should be 2.8 or 2.81 or 2. So that's kind of where we've landed as far as policy goes.
So last year, that's where we took it. We might still be in a phasing stage. I'm not sure if you've landed exactly where you want to land, but that was sort of the steps to going to sort of setting those in some kind of policy or set them in some kind of maiden Squamish approach to ratios. How much do you want to share the burden and how much do you want to share the rate? What do you think is reasonable in terms of what a business pays in relation to what a house pays?
Thank you.
Thanks, yeah, I was pretty set before seeing it laid out with a 2.6 and a 2.8. I think it's totally reasonable to stay at 2.8, and I wouldn't have gone above that with the BC average being 2.6. But when you're looking at such low amounts of dollars, it's impossible to argue against that. I think saying the word reasonable is exactly what it is. It's a reasonable burden for businesses.
And just to clarify, at that ratio, business is actually going down on average.
The tax rates went down and on average, the BC is actually going to pay, businesses are going to pay less.
The same.
So
And
maybe-
assessments.
Sorry to interrupt.
As you can see, this is very complicated.
Yeah. And so I think when we were talking about the ratios last year, is we were trying to stabilize them so that industry and business could have more predictability. And as that part of our economy grows, we, I think, can then shift it more evenly without overburdening them from a tax basis, right? So it will, as they grow as a tax class, it moves out of residential. But in prior years, it was always a moving target. And what we were trying to do is say, if you're a business in Squamish, it's probably not going to go higher than 2.8 or 3.8. In fact, it might even, as we do things. But it's the consistency piece that I think we were going after last year.
That's what we were trying to get, was some kind of philosophy around it, because we had a mixed bag of caps and ratios, and then we'd say, oh well, we should see the residential go down because they had growth. They wouldn't, because all the other caps would be eating up, and it would get burdened and pushed more to the residential because we had all these caps based on different types of averages. So we were just trying to get a little more of a stabilizing. This is never an easy question, Council. This is probably one of the hardest things you'll try to do, but I was just going to go see
Susan
what
and Patty.
Yeah, and for our businesses, until we actually increase our employment service area, then we can actually grow our businesses in order to make more money. I'll just say, as a small business, it's really hard in this district right now until we have employment lands that we can grow into. We can't earn any more money. So if our tax rate goes up, you're basically extracting wages from people. That also makes the general tax base go down because we have to find the money somewhere. So it's either pay people less, increase our prices, and make the town more affordable, less affordable. And so, looking at our assessments this year, we're not as bad as residential because there has not been a lot of sales. There's been new places, there's been a little bit of new employment land as we shift our zoning as well. And that zoning also affects tax ratios. So I think we've done a pretty good job of evening out businesses between the business park and downtown.
And I'm sorry, I'm just going to try and bring up last year's BC averages, just because
It was the same, it was 2.6 last year too.
Patty? Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see next year and year following because of all the employment lands that are going on. Business Park, we just approved, $180,000 oceanfront lands, and hopefully you'll actually see that effect, that targeted effect we've been trying to have on business and light industrial, and hopefully, hopefully there's a bit of growth in the North Yard that we can sort that out too. So I think there's positivity on the horizon. I wouldn't mind if Christine, I know you're busy, I may interrupt for a moment.
I'm listening. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I just thought of trying to bring up last year's model so we could
get
see
a
some.
sense of how the port cap has been affecting the redistribution over the, I don't know if you can do this, but the 13 years that the port cap has been in effect. Because the port assessment goes down every year. So their share has been going down for 13 years. And that's been I'm trying to get all the factors in place so we can weigh a practical decision on the port.
And I think the best idea is to actually, they in their letter, they actually provide you with an indication of their municipal taxes over the last several years. And there have been some increases, but essentially as of last year, they actually started to go backwards. And this year, if they hadn't had a non-market change, I think it was a 0.32% drop they were going to have in tax. So to the mayor's point,
Actual dollars? Can you equate that to dollars somehow?
don't know if I have the model handy, but in terms of 0.32 would be, they were at about 400,000, so not a lot. They would have hardly even noticed it in 20 grand or so.
It's on this page.
It's on this, yeah, but the actual tax change is on there. And that was kind of the ministry's point with not taking the whole dock, that whole 9 million to 22.5 is that was specifically the ministry's response back to me. But they've been depreciating. They're just replacing what they should have replaced. It was depreciated, right? So that's not an improvement. We'll only improve what they did over and above that. So it is a solid argument that they're being treated like other property owners. I think what we need to step back and go is that okay, given they're our another major employer? And that's really, I can't answer that, but I can run you some scenarios later. And we're coming to that shortly in terms of what does their ask mean? What does that look like? And then we can bring up the model if you want, and we can even say, okay, what if we gave them this instead? What does that look like?
All right, so should we try and get there? And then we can ask some questions, Patty, around that?
I'm not trying to skirt the mayor's question, but it's hard for me to
No, I
answer.
know.
But
I
if
knew it
you
wasn't
think
my
about the
question.
fact that these basically haven't gone up very much, and we remember that we've been increasing kind of on average around 3 to 5 in the last few years, they have been sitting pretty stable while the rest of the tax classes were.
So, and my point, I guess I'm trying to make, so I'm understanding it is, let's say that if we'd been able to do the legal stuff with their class that we can't do because of the cap, they would have been paying $20,000 extra more last year, in theory, and maybe even $20,000 more the year before for however long we've had the tax class, which is hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I'm just trying to get in context.
They're very fair statements, and that's the thing that we're trying to bridge
Yeah,
here,
they
right? It's
absolutely
like we
do.
understand it's a big impact, but at the same time, it's kind of like accumulated impact.
All right, so where do you take us?
Okay, so let's scurry ahead here. So we went through the other scenarios. Unless I hear differently, we're kind of still at the fixed ratio one. I see some furrowed brows, so again, we can take the model out and rethink some of that. So the port's request, they asked, instead of the $30,000, what if you gave us half of that, split the difference? So we would put the port rates down from, right now there's a blend of 27.5 and 22.5. This would bring the port rate down to 21.35, would generate that $117,000 increase, or almost $118,000. It's never an exact science. It's lots of things, moving parts. That would have a 5.88% effective rate, like that effective rate that I have to multiply 2016 by to get the right number out the other end. The average family would go from 143 to 174. The average business, I think we had said it was at 206, it would go to 174. It's about there. So in terms of, it would still be lower than last year, and the light industry would be at a reduction of 77 on the average. And the port ratio would then slide to about 6.29, which is, just below the ABC average, but probably somewhere in the hood. The Surrey tax rate, because they also reference in their letter, what if we got the Surrey tax rate? Again, I loathe to compare tax rates to tax rates. I just find you don't have a clue what you're dealing with. You don't know that means anything more than, you can see how we build our tax rate, right? It's an average of last year. I don't know how relevant it is.
And we're definitely not Surrey.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is Surrey's ratio, although it doesn't show up in their letter, is I believe somewhere in the 6 range still, 6.9 or something. But this would kick us out at a ratio of 3.28 for the port to do that. So I don't think you're interested in that scenario. So if you're playing with anything, I would suggest you're probably playing with the upper one and some element of that. I don't have all the stats here. I'd rather just go back in the model. After a while, it gets hard to process through all that paper of playing with the numbers, so I'd rather just bring it up and show you here. But at one point I thought, well, what if I just put the whole tax class at 22.5, which is their capped rate on the improvement? What would that look like? And I've run some various scenarios through. If we just took them to the BC rate ratio for municipality, it's hardly any adjustment to them at all. I don't know if it's even, I said to Mr. Shevchuk, I'm not even sure that's worth your while. But if you want me to do it, I'll do it. So that's why I think they've come back with the 180. And at that point, basically, we'd be at the financial plan amendment piece. So in terms of talking about the water, etc. So if you want, I can bring up the model and we can, if there's stomach for it, we can see what these things look like, or you can tweak the ratios if we don't think our philosophy has gotten us yet to where we really want to be in terms of relation to residential. Happy to bring that model up for everyone to have a look at.
Council, what's your appetite? There's kind of two questions.
I'm sorry, yes.
But, so, one, if people are happy with the ratios that Christine's presented, but as soon as we start talking about the port, those ratios change. So, I think people, I just want to get a sense of whether people want Christine to open the model to look at the port and provide some relief to the port.
I want to see what all the options are for the board.
Okay, so Christine, I think you're going to need to open the model.
I'm sorry, what?
I think you need to open the model.
The model, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I can show you the
I'd
ratios in
like
there.
to see that option number 1 proposed as 6.69 ratio. I'd like to see how that affects all the other ratios. That's going to be dramatic.
So remembering that my approach here is to fix the ratios. So it affects the effective rate on the residential, right? So the tax rate goes up a bit more.
Okay,
And then the others are still fixed
okay, so
in terms
the
of
other ones
ratio.
will be fixed.
Yeah.
Okay, so it would just transferring the
It would-
burden onto the residential.
Basically, there's a little bit of shifting for everybody because the tax rate goes up overall. So now 3.8 of that tax rate is a little bit higher. So it does shift it a little bit to everybody, but
Okay,
more
that's right.
dramatically to res.
But it won't change the ratio.
It doesn't change the ratio on the
Just the
others,
ratio.
yeah. Just the impact of that
I
ratio.
know. You kind of-
Trust me, I was going to loony on Sunday.
Could you go back to the slide that has the ratios on it?
Yes.
For the port, or no, the whole table,
The whole table.
the whole table.
It was just up a couple minutes ago.
Oops, sorry, wrong one. It's here though.
That's the one. I think that's the one. Oh, except it doesn't show 16, 17. So
So they want the ratio to go way below PCI.
maybe what I was looking for was the one I'm looking at the port where it says percent of the burden is 2% of the burden. In other words, they're paying 2% of the tax burden.
Overall.
We're comparing that's this year. If it was,
Last
if it
year was-
carried on.
1.6.
Right, so that's the point. So in effect, because of this rebuilding of their dock, the whole burden has slightly shifted
Shifted to them.
to them a little bit. That's the part, for me at least, that if there's any philosophical argument in their favor, it would be that the burden isn't being shared equally. It is moved away from other classes onto them,
Mhm.
or a percentage of it has. And how we would rationalize that amongst other classes.
So what I think, this is where Patty was saying earlier, that in prior years, their rate hasn't gone up. And so we have been able to shift burden to them in the past as things went up. I think this was what the argument you were making
I
earlier.
was trying to make the point, not necessarily
Argument, but the point that, so that's why there might be some hesitation with that approach.
Well, and understandably, and you look at the numbers, though, it's hard to rationalize the numbers because they do change, notwithstanding the fact that there would be some depreciation there. You'd think, if nothing else changes, they're going down slightly at a cap rate, but they don't. They jump all over the place, actually, within a certain range. And so I take the point, yeah, they haven't gone up like that, but the other thing, trying to take their position for a minute, is the result of this is because of a disaster. It's not just a business as usual thing. It's not wasn't a choice of theirs to rebuild their dock. It was kind of thrust upon them by something outside their control. So that, if there's any compassion involved, would be the thing that would, for me at least, would trigger a reevaluation of this. Compassion in a financial sense, I guess, is, we're not trying to fall in love with them, but yeah, but so, or sympathy, maybe I guess is a better word for it, but anyway, I'll just stop there.
So what you're saying is could we move closer to the burden, so the percentage of the burden is that?
If you try to get it back to the 1.6% instead of 2%, what would that look like?
It would look like 22.5%. So I just played, I don't know if any of you remember this ugly little model from last year. But, and it's, sorry, it is really hard to read. Let me just see if I can get it a bit bigger for you. So what you can see here is that I plug in these ratios, and this is sort of the model down below, getting to that description I told you about. If I brought the port rate and just said across the board, we're giving them 22.5%, so we're bringing them down to the improvement cap across the board, I would have to raise to about 5.76% that effective rate, right, to make enough revenue. This is, I'm trying to get this magic number into a positive right here. And that, when I look at the analysis, would, sorry, darker, a little bigger. You can see that would bring them back to 1.6% burden, to your point.
What if we went to the BC average?
And what you need to understand too is we're picking up, I just gotta go make sure that's picking up the average, but that one would be purely that. But when they've got a blended rate, I actually have to do a weighted average to see how they are in relation to that ratio. So right now so if we brought them to the average, I think it was about 24%, and I have to give them the 22.5 cap still. So, because I can't go over what, so I think I had to change this to about
We'd have to go above the cap.
I can't go above the cap on the improvement, right? I'm still bound by that legislation. So I just got to see what the average ratio here is. So the weighted average then would be 7.10. So we don't have to go quite to 24.5, but to your point, that's fairly close. Oh, actually, I got to just run that through.
She's starting to mutter to herself.
Yes, I am. Trust me, I've been muttering all weekend. This is a lot of fun, folks.
Doug, oh, sorry. Doug and Patty.
Without disturbing Christine letting her work,
Seven
I guess where I'm coming from, the council is if they didn't have the fire and they didn't have that jump in their assessment, what would everybody else be paying? Presumably our financial plan would be the same. We're going to spend the same amount of money. So it would be borne by the other classes. So in effect, if we go to the way this initially works out with their higher assessment, the rest of the municipality, if you like, is profiting from your disaster. So that's kind of the philosophical thing, and I know it's, I don't mean to sound like it's legal intent or anything like that, but that's the effect of it, is because their assessment goes up so much. It reduces the tax burden on everybody else. So I'm, for myself, looking for some kind of a happy medium in there, where we might get some relief, maybe not go the whole way. But for me, the philosophical justification for that is because it is as a result of this kind of, call it natural disaster,
It's not a natural disaster.
Okay,
or a natural disaster.
so I've got Patty, Susan, and then Tim.
So I'm just looking at, and I haven't made it determined, I'm just trying to get all the factors into my brain so I can do this. So I'm looking at their Squamish Terminal's property tax review on page something of the letter. And essentially since 2009, for some reason 2008 it was over 500,000, but it's been in the 430 range for 7 years. Essentially it hasn't changed very much for 7 years. I'll tell you, in that 7 years, my property tax has risen substantially, and I'm sure everyone at this table it has risen in the probably 50–60% range in that time, just because of assessments and various value. And so I'm trying to, they've basically been at a cap. Everyone else has been going up for 10 years, and they have not gone up for as long as they've basically put this thing out. So I think that's a little bit of a factor in my determination. The birth was not a natural disaster. It was an electrical fire. I don't even know if they know the cause yet. It's been under investigation. And it's unfortunate, brutally unfortunate. But anyone who makes an improvement on the property pays more. So that's factoring into my decision making. Yes, it was not planned, and yes, it's a huge jump they didn't anticipate, so that's also, I think I'm trying to figure out a way to be compassionate there too. I'm just sort of articulating a variety, I'm going like this on some variety of different issues. I think also, had we factored, if this hadn't happened, as Councillor Ray said, and we had made a determination, we likely would have taken a slightly different approach with the financial plan, and maybe we're going to have to go back and consider that. Because we wouldn't have achieved the goal that we set out in terms of being under 5% and all that sort of stuff right from the outset. Because essentially, it's what they're originally asking for was basically a 1% difference in taxes. So there's a lot of things to factor out, and I worry that you do this here and another business has a fire and they come back and say, well, we had to make improvements because there's different standards today, and all of a sudden our taxes are up 50%. We had a fire too, where you could give us a tax break. We can't do it individually within other classes. They just happen to be in a class of their own here. So, it's a hard evaluation to do. You're trying to be fair, you're trying to be understanding of everybody, but also the court's predicament, having to, I'm sure they anticipated some increase because you improve your property, if your assessment's going to go up. I think maybe the amount of the increase was a little more shocking to them than they anticipated. They must have anticipated. I'm surprised their assessment didn't go down when they didn't have a birth for those 2 years.
The timing didn't work out for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was tough timing.
Susan and then Ted.
Thanks. Well, it's not residential, it's employment. And it is one of the largest employers in Squamish. And I feel, I look at the argument the same way that Doug does, in that percentage increase that they've had because of an unfortunate event that actually benefits the community, that makes it less of a fire hazard. Putting in that steel was an immense expense. So they not only had the expense of having to rebuild a berth to maintain our employment lands, but they also have this unfortunate assessment. And I would agree that the burn would have been shifted to residential, and residential is actually using, if it wasn't such a, going from 146 to 174, I don't think is too much of a burden for our tax base. And we did, had we gone back through the financial plan, I would have cut, I know I voted against a lot of things that were going on, but I
You can still go back to the financial.
Yeah, I would be happy to go back and remove a lot of small improvements that weren't absolutely essential out of our financial plan to reduce the burden. There's things that I would actually take out now, looking at our tax burden, because I think still $800,000 is cheap, just walking down Cleveland Avenue and looking at the property boards. I think most single-family homes are up over $1 million because we've also allowed densification, so people are able to achieve a lot higher rates for their properties because of multiple property combinations and other factors that just are basic factors of growth. So I would philosophically agree with going back to, or reducing the burden on the poor. Well, I don't mind the first scenario, but I would also be happy with going back to the financial plan to take a little bit more out.
Okay, so I've got Ted.
Yeah, thanks. Interesting the way Patty put it there. That was helpful for me. I wouldn't have thought of that. But I do support Doug's comments. Nice to follow what Patty did. That was good information, and kind of does affect it, but I'm with Doug on. And I do think
Well, I'm with Doug on that too. I'm not.
No, I just thought it was an interesting.
There's lots of
trying to
different
find a balance.
concepts
I
going
just
on.
thought it was an interesting, I'm not saying you were or weren't, an interesting analysis of that.
So I reran this again to get to the average ratio so that we get the port closer to what the BC average ratio is. And this is a weighted average because they have two rates, so we have to blend it. And I was able to get it to basically 7.23 by going to a 25 basically a tax rate of 25 and 22.5 on the improvement. That has a 5.55% impact on the ratio, or not the ratio, how to confuse everybody, on the effective lift. It has a reduction in taxes of about 22.53% in terms of actual tax rate reduction.
On the board.
No, on the,
Overall.
on overall, for other rate classes.
Oh,
And that's down from 26.
24, I think. And then we had, so this is what they'd look like. They'd now be taking 1.8 of the burden. We would actually have, and this is just picking up the major industry, the 27 rate, because we have 2 lines now in this, but it's actually we have it at 7.23 as a weighted average ratio. They would be basically increasing $191,000. So not quite the break they're looking for, but basically that would be their lift now, 191.
So they say 50
Yeah, because I think before it was 236, 232-ish. So yeah, 40 to 40,000-ish. And what does that look like for our average folks here? So $149 per year, and all the other rates still going down. And now they're being hit with about 50% average change, which is what I'm thinking.
Council?
Just so I'm clear, so that takes the average single family from, I think it was 143 a year to 149 a year, so $6
A year.
a year.
Yep.
And
That's the average though.
yeah, and reduces the decrease for commercial and light industry
Slightly, yeah.
slightly. And we say the port, you said I think about 50,000. I didn't quite hear that.
40,000.
262.
Here, I've got a hard copy here somewhere,
41.
or I can just run it back through again.
41.
262 is the original.
What's the original one? That sounds.
262?
262.
Okay, so that's 70,000.
According to their one.
There it's been. Did that include other agencies though?
Municipal tax increase, 262.
262 to 190 something.
Yeah, because it would have been 630, it would have been 620. Would have been 620 through, or about 623 before. Under our modeling,
32.
before the library.
So I didn't quite follow where we ended up with that. So
So do you want me to run it back again with the previous numbers?
I'm just curious about the amount that they might save.
Let me just freeze this number so that we don't, I don't know about you guys, but I might forget it. Okay.
I've memorized it.
Let's go back to that.
Oh, initially it was 236, was their first ask.
With the library, yeah. So, or 238 it looks like. So they'd have a reduction of 46,616.
And that splits the difference on the burden, doesn't it?
Yeah, they put them at 1.8% burden to do that.
And brings them to the BC average ratio.
When I look at the weighted ratio, so I had to, again, the weighted average is 7.83 under the current, and with the other one it went down to, I believe it was 7.23.
So, council, is there comments, reactions, consensus on that? Yeah. Thoughts? No?
Well, I can live with that.
Okay, got one live with that. Mhm. Peter?
I can live with it, yeah, I know it's not what they were hoping for, but still, think it's equitable.
So, a reasonable gesture.
Yeah, it is.
Patty?
Yeah, for now, I think so. For now, I'd like to have a peek at the financial plan too.
Okay. See how it all works out with everybody else. Okay, so we do have to talk about the financial plan amendment, and so maybe the place to do that is in the capital plan, or the financial plan.
Yeah, we
amendment.
move that and then come back. So,
And then-
and in terms of ratios, are we,
I didn't hear any disagreement with the ratios, and we proposed them, and so I think council's okay with sticking to the philosophy it sort of was using last year, so I think we're good there.
great, okay.
So we can talk about the bylaw change, the amendment to the financial plan because of the water grant, and then if there's some appetite by council to open up the budget, we can do that. I hesitate to say that.
Shudder.
Let me get this back here, sorry. Bear with me because I see it. Did we skip it?
He's coming back.
Do we want a 2-minute recess here? Let's do that. Kelsey, let's have a
Sure, that'd
2-minute
be great. That
recess.
gives me a chance to get the thing back on here too. 'Cause
Okay, we're back in the Finance and Audit Standing Committee for Tuesday, April 11th, and we're on agenda item 5.2, which is an amendment to our financial plan because we got a big grant for our water utility. So I'll hand it over to you.
Good morning, Chair and Council. My name is David Rolston, I'm a municipal engineer with the District of Squamish. So we're here to recommend modifying the financial plan in order to incorporate new information. A substantial piece of that is that we have received $2.75 million in the past 5 months for water capital work. And there's also some other new information. So quickly, in October 2016, we received a $1.6 million grant. And then just last month, we received a second grant for $1.1 million. In addition, we have realized that it's not going to be feasible for us to spend our entire water meter installation budget. We had budgeted $1.7 million. And it's just going to be very logistically difficult to spend all of that money in 2017. We've also realized that as part of the Cleveland Victoria to Main streetscape upgrades, that there is a water main underneath those upgrades that should be replaced at the same time prior to putting extensive improvements over top. And then lastly, only a portion of the DCC W6 government road water main was actually approved in the first grant. And so we wanted to reduce the scope of that project. So based on that new information, the recommended modifications are to increase our water main replacement budget to account for those successful grant applications, to add in the $129,000 to replace the water main underneath Cleveland, to reduce our water meter installations budget in 2017 and to defer the remainder to 2018, to reduce the overall scope of the DCC project to reflect what was actually in the grant, as well as incorporating a contingency, and then finally adjusting the funding sources for all of these different water main capital projects just to reflect the grant money that we have received.
Thanks. Do you have a question, Katie?
I think it's there, the deferral for line 3.
Okay. So
I just have one more
Oh,
slide.
yeah, let you go.
So the overall impacts are we're reducing the total amount in the water capital for these projects by about 100,000, so from 3.7 down to 3.6 million. But the big benefit is that the amount that's funded by the utility goes from 2 million down to 850,000 because of taking into account the additional grant money that we're going to be receiving. So going from 1.6 up to 2.7 for grants. And then lastly, because of modifying and just reducing the scope of the one DCC project, that would go from about 108,000 down to 62,000. So those are the high level impacts, and then this is just a detailed summary of all of those projects and what the previous funding assumption was and what the new funding assumption is.
Peter, are you good on your?
Yes, I'm just
Okay.
squinting because I didn't bring my glasses. The answer's in there, I know.
Jack?
Does this impact rates this year, or just borrowing?
Through the chair, do I have microphones? So this actually is all in the water utility itself, so it does not impact any of our rates. We are actually changing up the borrowing ratio and some of that, but it doesn't have any impact on your tax rates that we were just looking at.
I
No, I was
think
thinking
Doug's talking
utility-
utility rates.
I was thinking of the utility
The
rate.
utility rate is fine, we're actually contributing a little bit more to capital reserve under this amendment change.
So the rates stay the same.
And we're
Your
able
borrowing
to,
is not,
as impacted as far as.
is reduced, which will have ultimately an impact. Thank you.
Patty?
Yeah, I'm glad to see that we're catching this 129,000 water main replacement under the Cleveland Avenue fix. But I'm a little concerned that it's come so late in the game. I mean, this is something council's going to be clear about, is if we're ripping up the road, we always want to make sure we're doing the infrastructure underneath. So my assumption would be that this would have been considered right up front, and I'm a little worried that it's the 11th hour. Oh, by the way, I'm a little concerned about that. I mean, that's not how, maybe the question's actually through to the CAO is why is this so late? And I just want to make sure that, you know, we're not doing this kind of thing.
I'm actually going to defer to staff because I don't believe that's the case. I think it's more the funding that we're looking at in terms of this. But if you could clarify.
Yeah, so typically in any given year, we have an annual water main replacement budget, and we just title it annual water main replacements, and then we choose the actual projects based on where we're going to be repaving and other capital projects. That wasn't possible this year because when we submit grant applications, we have to be explicit and say these are the projects that we're going to be doing. And we were submitting these grant applications in 2016 prior to having all of the information available for Cleveland, and just hadn't realized the age and condition of the water main underneath Cleveland. So we kind of lost that flexibility in receiving the grant money. And so that's why we're saying we should add in this additional amount specifically for that project.
So we're basically taking money from this project to do this other project, so we have to backfill over here, is that what you're saying?
Pretty
So we
much.
had anticipated it in the overall budget for that project. The overall budget for that project isn't going up, we're just sort of trying to reallocate funds.
Correct.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
Anything to add, or are you guys?
Sorry, yes, I think.
Are you sure?
The way I remember this shaking out, and we'll actually have Matt in here for Cleveland Phase 2 this evening, so we can clarify between now and then if the detail is important. But I believe that the tender came in, that we were hoping to do the water main under the Cleveland Phase 2. The tender came in higher than we were expecting, and we had to take it out of scope and put it into the water utility. I may not have that right, so let me get that from Matt, and we can talk about that in this evening.
Yeah, that was more confusing. You will.
I thought
I
it's in the water
apologize.
utility.
I apologize for adding to the confusion. Yeah.
Thanks for the report.
Linda?
If I can help clarify, and engineering, correct me if I'm wrong, so for phase 2, with the water main part of it, so yes, we were considering when we rip up Cleveland for the above ground, the water main would happen at the same time. That was
Definitely.
always planned, to your question, thank you. Where it was funded from is switching based on getting this grant so that we can afford it all. And I think that's the level of detail that
yeah.
council needs.
Yeah, because the grant was specifically identified projects, and then that used up the amount of money that we had for annual water main replacements, and we needed to find another funding source.
Yes.
Okay.
Go team, I think we said.
The strategy is to confuse them until they give up.
Not
I
our
get it,
intent.
I get it.
So, maybe a question for Christina or Robin. So we have a resolution in front of us specifically on this item, although council's expressed an interest to look at the financial plan. So do you want me to pass this motion first? Or do you want to wait till we have a bigger discussion?
I'm fine with you passing this motion, and then if we need to add another one to another amendment, we can do that.
Okay.
Just because this is committee and it needs to be ratified
Anyway.
regardless this afternoon.
Yeah,
And it's not affecting our general tax rate?
No,
It's only going into the utility which we're paying through.
so does anyone put this one forward? Put forward by Doug, seconded by Susan. Any more comments? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
This is a good amendment.
This is a really good amendment. Thank you very much.
Well done.
So council, we have no shortage of meetings this afternoon, so let's try and wrap this up in a timely manner.
Straight up.
Oh, the package.
No. I'm just hoping I've got enough of these
Yeah,
guys.
those are different.
It's just one each, Christine, right?
Yes, please, and then,
But there's two of these ones.
No, this is special project, this is service.
I did, she's not enough, so.
oh, did you guys hand out as well?
No, well, you handed out something, there was two of this.
Oh, okay.
I think that was one side.
Yeah, I just need the, sorry, there, apparently there's some confusion. You don't need this one, it got in an error, so you can just get rid of that.
Okay.
I'll take that one.
You don't need that.
I need
That's the error one.
one. Are these any different, Christine, than Mondays?
Probably do you have extra of those spreadsheets?
Yeah, they're coming around.
So when the smoke clears, you should have one that looks like this little guy. No cut, no red on it. Okay? And you should have a nice, a prettier looking big one. Sort of easier to read. And then you should have the not so pretty capital plan looking one. Okay?
Gary, here.
So, council,
Can I have the red one, please? Said I need a red one.
what I'm providing you,
I need a yellow.
are we doing? Okay.
They're coming around. They're coming around. The
Was
yellow
it
is
in
there.
And our minute taker needs a red one.
Where's this one? Doug, you have them in front of you.
No, that's just mine.
How many did you make?
Are any of those arrested or?
I made 20, but I wasn't sure I had enough of this one.
Yeah, that's the one we're
Sorry,
missing.
Peter, you and I can share a big one.
And I'm not sure if it got clogged in the printers.
No. Those are,
Yes.
I need one of those yellow.
Peter and I are sharing the big red one. We're good.
Okay, we're good.
Very good.
Okay,
Although Peter's not sharing it.
so why did I give you these? All right. Thank you, Gary, I'm going to explain that now. All right, so if our intent is to go back and look at the financial plan in terms of how it impacts your actual tax rates, then you need to, we've given you the things, the schedules, where there are things that do that, okay? So the first one being our service level changes, and the dollar values in the column, in the first column, like the first dollar value column, that is your impact on tax rate. Why am I echoing?
Because these are gold.
Okay. The long full
In
scale
2017.
in 2017. The long full scap one, or the long 11 by 17, this is your special projects. If you look at the red column that says taxation, anything with a number in there impacts your tax rate. Okay? So there's lots of projects on there, but only the dollar values in the taxation column will actually make your tax rate get better. And then you have your capital plan, which is your capital plan, but I've only shown you in the yellow where it actually impacts your tax rate. Okay? I want to put a couple of caveats on this exercise, please. Remember when we started this process, we had asked council for a $650,000 special project envelope. We are now down to about 486,306, okay? We had asked council to do a minimum of 1.5 million to capital direct, and we'd asked you to put a 1% capital plan increase to your capital reserve. We took the 1% increase to the capital reserve transfer out already, and we're now hovering at about 1.5 million for the thing, and mine doesn't have totals, hopefully yours does. You need to see on the back side of this page. Thank you, 1.56 million, basically the green line on the bottom of your, so that's your direct contribution to capital.
Oh, there's a second slide.
Okay. So with that in mind, and the only reason I outlined that for you is there are things, I'm not looking at anyone in particular, but you could throw accumulated surplus at these projects now to make this go away this year. But just a reminder that means that those levels are lower for next year too. So when you come to do your budgeting for next year, you're going to have a lower capital or a lower special project envelope, even lower than 438, which is lower than last year's, and you're going to have a lower capital investment level. And if you try and raise those, you're going to impact taxes, okay? So if you want to smooth this, you might not want to attack this too much with accumulated surplus, okay? That's all I'll say. Have fun.
All right. So, here we go. I think I saw your minute. Did I?
Yeah, I don't want to touch accumulated surplus.
So, Christine, you had some slides up earlier that showed the level of decrease we would need to accomplish in order to actually affect the tax rate in a meaningful way.
So, yes, I did. And I actually took the 1% and that brought you to the 4.4, which was, let me just pull that back up for you. Sorry, right there. This one.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so if you got, you might not have to go to the full 1% to still get below, but you can see that this would definitely get you below the 1% or less.
How could we forget, what is the downtown entrance study again?
That's looking at the design of Cleveland from Buckley to the highway in terms of traffic and urban design, is my best recollection. It also might be capturing the amounts for a downtown traffic study. I have to go back and
I'll pull up the sheet if you want to
Yeah.
carry on.
the rest of my recollection.
Got my pointer too.
I don't see downtown traffic study.
Which is why I suspect it might be including amounts of traffic studies.
And it's just a study, the design of that quarter of a kilometer stretch of road. Just a study, almost $40,000.
I've got a suspicion it may have been wrapped and combined with an overall traffic study for the downtown area to be more encompassing. But if we can just check.
Yeah, I'll bring up that one.
Yeah, Susan, no more studies. Thanks.
Studies.
No more studies, but we have the oceanfront road coming as well. If we don't understand how to move traffic in that area, I think I totally agree with sending anything that can address the traffic congestion. It's been crowded without having motorists.
It'd be nice to know what the study is.
Gary?
The project description study the area bounded by 99 Pemberton, Bailey and West Loggers, taking into account the following issues: emergency access, Pemberton Avenue entrance, Bailey Loggers Lane truck routing, Cleveland Avenue gateway, downtown transportation hub and network connections for all modes of transportation.
much cheap for that.
Sorry,
side.
yeah.
And it's
Most problem area in town.
Yes.
It's also a DCC funded project to the tune of 11,000 and change.
But
Contributing
38 of it is
50, yes.
I'm just gonna throw this out there, that I'm not sure where, if it's been purchased or not, but the trail improvement, the machine is $200,000, which is significant.
It is, but if I may just clarify, I believe you already threw accumulated surplus of that, so it's not impacting taxation.
Yeah, I'm going to surprise you. I was not going to suggest accumulated surplus until you mentioned it. You did put the seed in my mouth. But I'm not going to go there. No, actually, I'm fine with it. I don't see things, I know we've gone through this quite extensively, and I just don't see things that I would want to start cutting. I appreciate that takes the rate slightly over 5%, and for me, I think probably like others, was sort of an emotional barrier from your emotional target, but all things considered, I'm content with being slightly over.
Christine, just one point of clarification. The Adventure Center parking lot improvements and the special projects, I thought that was going to be funded from lease money, not from taxation.
It is, so hopefully it's not showing that
It's
way.
showing
But well, I
12,000.
think because the service level change is also showing against taxation on a different form, and so they net each other out.
Okay,
So there's one's on a service level change as the new lease revenue, and one's on a special project to do the delineation, but the two of them wipe each other out
Okay,
between the two sheets.
thanks.
So,
Yeah, I just want to make sure that that's the case. So we've heard from Doug, Patty, and Peter to Vincent.
Are we, oh, is Mina?
Yep.
Are we gonna get to the boundary extension project this year? Are we gonna spend that money?
Neil's already started.
Right now, he's working on 2 other major projects that are expected to be done by early summer. So the intent is boundary expansion is the next project, and the money that's on there is for legal, surveys, registrations. That's what those projects are.
So yes, we're gonna spend
Yep.
that money in this year.
Linda?
Yes, that's the intent.
Patty, you good?
For the moment.
Susan and Peter.
Yeah, I still wanted the number of the total amount of improvements we're putting into that area, and we never really got to discuss janitorial services or anything else that comes with that lease. And Chris was going to mention at one point that he had already done the thing, he was going to mention it, and the conversation was held.
What item are you talking about, I'm sorry?
Billiards, they're not billiards, they're parking curbs, doing the parking curbs, doing the crosswalk improvements, and there was a bunch of improvements that were, I'm assuming the parking lot improvements is just the curbs.
So my understanding, and I'm hoping Gary will fill me in, my understanding is that some information was brought back when we were talking about the active transportation plan, and that there was some sidewalk improvement work being done. Under this lease, it's specifically to do the delineations and the barriers within the parking lot.
Yeah, the parking lot curbs, that's a 12 grand.
Yeah.
There's the crosswalks.
And then my understanding is some of the active transportation is dealing with some of the sidewalk lifts, et cetera, and a crosswalk in that area. And I believe that's all that's being covered in 2016
Signage.
or 2017.
Yeah.
No signage apparently.
Signage, no, that wasn't. No, the crosswalks are being done through the active transportation budget.
A second crosswalk?
No, modifications, safety improvements to the existing crosswalk.
And the traffic rerouting for the industrial trucks. You cannot have that be an industrial road, that all the industrial traffic has to be routed in order to have.
But that was
Yeah, so that's
signage.
the other
We
one.
did-
That's fine, yeah.
That's signage, so
That's fine.
we'll have to talk to operations about including that in the signage.
So you still want to take anything off?
Nope,
You're happy?
Nope, yeah, I'm trying to.
Peter?
And ditto here, we've gone through this pretty exhaustively with fine tooth comb, I think, and the results to me look fine, I would not change anything.
Ted, I'm gonna check in with you because you are, generally you've been the most concerned about tax increases, and so this is really our last kick at the can.
I heard my taxes were going up approximately $100, so I'm not complaining.
Because it's about you.
Because it's about you. Okay, I just want to make sure that,
4,000 to 4,200.
so I just want to make sure that there's nothing on here that you want to pull so that you can
Thanks.
move forward with integrity. Okay. Anybody else? Patty?
I'm gonna wing it.
Okay, wing away.
And maybe I'll ask a question before I wing away. Wing away. Bylaw adjudication clerk. This is to implement this new. I just don't believe we're gonna find we're close to the revenue to justify this position, especially in the first year of implementation.
Through the chair.
What's the risk of not hiring that person in 2017?
So through the chair, the risk of not hiring that person means that we're not able to implement the new adjudication process, which is a new ticketing process. So really the net revenue from a variety of enforcement processes will likely be reduced. The bylaw adjudication clerk is integral to moving forward with that process. In the number above is where the net revenue is shown. There isn't net revenue shown on the adjudication clerk, and that position will do a variety of administrative tasks, making the bylaw officers more efficient and increasing their productivity. So, you know, but it would. Not having that clerk will impact on our ability to implement the new process.
And the collection aspect?
And we're working with finance on improving our collection process, which will, we'll also see improvements in the amount of revenue to the district. Not just from bylaw enforcement aspect, but from a variety of aspects. So we're working with finance right now on that and have seen some improvements.
So my worry is that in the very first year of implementing this program, we're adding a whole position that will be there in perpetuity, and we have no idea how much this is going to be. And so I would think we're adding another bylaw officer, that we take the first year to sort of see what the workload is going to be, see how it can be assimilated in the manager's position or other positions, and then next year make a decision based on an actual real number instead of a hypothetical. So I'm going to propose that we remove number 11 on this service level increase sheet, see where it goes, which is the bylaw education clerk. It's not for you to second, Jeff, sorry.
But no, I was, sorry about that.
So does anybody want to second that? Okay, Ted? Jeff?
Through the chair, the position is a .5 position. And I believe this is, I don't know the right word, but it may be slightly less than this given the month that we're in this year. But much of the work can't be reallocated to the others. The bylaw officer is a .6 position, so it's not a full bylaw officer. Not having the bylaw adjudication clerk will result in us not being able to move forward with the bylaw adjudication process that has been a council desire. I can't remember the exact year, but from 2006, 2008, hasn't been implemented for many years. and it will mean we won't be able to move forward with the new ticketing process. I think there will be increased efficiencies for that whole work group with the clerk, but we're putting that council's direction.
Yeah, and I'm not going to support this. I think this is something we as the council have bought into, this whole adjudication and ticketing process. And if it was just something on the fringes of it, I might be supportive, but I think I'm persuaded by the fact that this is sort of the linchpin of the project. And really what we're doing is just throwing the whole thing off for another year, and I'm not prepared to do that. So I will not support it.
Ted, did I see your hand?
Well, it's not on this subject, I just got a couple of
Okay,
things.
so let's stay on this motion. Patty?
Yeah, I don't view it as throwing it off here. I view it as taking a year to understand the actual workload and the capacity within the existing manager and enforcement officers, and understanding what this is going to be in terms of, you know, we've been going this long without someone moving forward on this adjudication. I'd like to understand, are we going to be, we go to this adjudication process on 5 files, on 300 files, on 10 files? I mean, if at the end of this year we go, yeah, we couldn't get to 300 files, that might have been X amount of revenue, I can go, okay, there's a full position. But in the absence of that, I would like to see how some of this function can be incorporated into the manager's role, and evaluate the amplitude of the problem, or what could be the problem, before we add a whole full-time position into the staffing complement.
Can you see your hand?
Yeah, I would, oh, that's a tough one, because you know that they're burdened, and if we want to look at any parking controls in the downtown or ticketing, we're gonna need extra staff to do that. And, you know, it just means that we can't make any changes in the next year because we won't have the staff to be able to implement any of the changes. The clerk, like, we have a bylaw officer and a clerk added. I'm having a tough time reducing that. So if there's any other counselors that can do it.
Yeah, so I'm just going to weigh in here and then I'll go to you, Ted. So I actually think increased bylaw enforcement was one of the things that the community has been asking for, and I think, which we're doing, and I think, remembering from our manager's presentation during the budget process, we were actually able to see that there's a lot of revenue we're not collecting because we simply don't have the time to track it down, and this whole process was about simplifying that so people could do it over the phone, and we need someone to manage that. So this could be an investment, and it might build over, you know, a couple of years, and I'm okay with that. And when I think about, you know, our discussion about businesses removing snow from their sidewalks and enforcing some parking regulations and going after unsightly premises, it takes resources, and we need a simplified way to then collect on those infringements. So I'm not going to support the motion on the table, and it doesn't really get us to where we need to go in terms of alleviating $260,000 here, so I'm happy to leave it in. I think it's a good investment, and it's in a place where our community is looking at for us to go. Ted, then.
Yeah, thanks.
Then Peter.
Well, I seconded it for the discussion. As soon as you said snow clearing, that works for me. If this clerk is the one that's responsible for tracking and finding and collecting people that aren't shoveling their sidewalks, for example. I mean, and I know we're going to have parking tickets going out, or we're going to have receipts. So can anybody comment on projected proposed revenues and how we benchmark those revenues?
Through the chair, in line item number 10, I believe we're projecting about a $10,000 revenue increase. That's where the offset is. I'd ask Christine to have a quick look at that. But it's from the results of increased enforcement, increased collection efforts, and the bylaw adjudication process. I think it's important to what Councillor Pryor was mentioning regarding the snow clearing, et cetera. Those will all be aspects of enforcement, and so the clerk would then be assisting those officers in a variety of tasks, but also mostly within the adjudication process. So, and the adjudication process is if a person doesn't pay a ticket or wants to dispute it, it's then putting that mechanism in place. I think it's also important to recognize that not all of the duties of the adjudication clerk can be redistributed to management, because many of those duties are within a clerk job description, which is within the bargaining unit, and so those are not every task can be redistributed, and the bylaw officers themselves do not have the capacity to have those tasks redistributed.
Thank you. Patty, Peter?
Yeah, I generally agree with everything that everyone's been said. I'm saying that this is brand new. We should take the year to understand the magnitude of the issue. We're already adding a bylaw enforcement officer. And just to remind everyone, this is adjudications for people who aren't paying their tickets. So ideally, people pay their tickets.
Peter?
Yeah, in the scheme of things, it's 0.2. I do think it does give some teeth to our enforcement, so.
I'm sorry, I was talking. Can I
I saw your hand over here.
Oh, no, I believe Jeff said it, but I just want to ensure there's clarity that both positions are part-time this year and next. So bylaw officer is part-time as well.
Okay. Any more comments, council? Before we call vote?
So, true to what the mayor said there, people still get fined right now, but if they don't pay the tickets, we don't provide them. And that's what this person's going to do. So you're still going to get fined.
Yeah, let's clarify that.
So through the chair, moving to a bylaw noticing program that then is part of the bylaw adjudication process will improve the efficiencies for the bylaw officers for ticketing. So for example, for parking enforcement, being able to write a ticket and have it enforceable and just drop it on your windshield under your wiper, for example, without having to have given personal service. So right now, the current process is, so they may put a ticket out there, but it's not, it's not enforceable. It's more, I've heard it referred to as a love note or something along that line, saying, hey, you parked incorrectly, or against the bylaw. Please don't do that again. And those things are great to try and get people towards voluntary compliance, but instead an actual ticket that is enforceable and would go into this kind of a process. And as far as collections, the district has, for a number of years, really sought on an honor system for people to pay their fines, and there's been very limited collection. And I hesitate to throw out a number because I was just looking at it just last week in some communication, but I think it's somewhere around like 67% in that range is not collected. And that's a significant amount. So we're working with finance to better improve that collections process, which this person will be largely responsible for. And so we look to see improvements in that, and if there is, as we bring forward the enforcement policy, the bylaw enforcement policy for the whole district, and talk about a philosophy of how we're going to approach that, then ideally the district will see increases in the amount of revenue coming in. I think also an important note is that at some point, if after a year and a half of review and council, through the CAO, direct us to do an analysis, the position doesn't have to be here forever. That individual are nice to do these things, but could be laid off. There's a whole process in the, if that were to happen, and of course that's not a road we'll want to go through, but if that resource could potentially be reallocated in the district if there was a need for other clerk work or whatever the case might be. But so that's an option that always exists for staff and on the direction of the council.
Can I call
So-
the question? No. You want to?
Pardon me?
Can I call the question?
Oh,
Or do you have?
well, I just wanted to know, I mean, if we're gonna go with this, I'd like to have that review. Not yet.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, we will be scrutinizing this next year. See it.
Patty will be scrutinizing this.
I hope council.
Yeah. I'm
So-
I'm thinking of snow, so this is,
Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor of taking this out of the budget? All those opposed? Councillor Reyes, Chappelle, Elliott, Kent, what did you vote?
I opposed.
And Pryor? Motion fails. Okay. Pat?
I move that we take number 2, the HR assistant out of the We're floating, and I want to.
We need to move to go in camera, please, Chair. We're going to talk about an existing position.
It's an existing position.
So released on early
It
release.
shouldn't be on this list, or we should be told what's already released.
So,
Okay, that's fine.
Patty, do you want me to go in camera for this? Okay. Any other suggestions, comments? Ted?
Okay, comments. So, property taxes are up big time. All of a sudden, something happens overseas and interest rates in the States go up, and interest rates here hit 10%. People are bailing on all their condos, house prices drop by 50%. What happens to your taxes? Do my taxes still stay at $5,000?
So that would be a council decision, obviously, in the year that happened, but essentially we adjust the tax rates to collect the amount of revenue required to run the municipality. If the assessments went down, then tax rates would have to go up to still collect the same
So if-
level of taxation unless council wanted to
so then
reduce their
we can-
services.
We can reduce staff though, right?
You can reduce services, you
Like
can
when we're
reduce
busy like
staff,
this,
you
I
can
understand
do it.
having a whole pack of people, but you know it is gonna get slow.
I think the key for everyone to understand is services are always a council option. The level and what we provide in services, there are some that once we're committed to it, we are legally required to provide that service to a certain standard. We grapple with those and try and bring those to you, but any of the level of service is absolutely within council's review to decide.
I'm just, to my point earlier, when I said I was good with taxes, because I see mine going up 200, I was reflecting what everybody's were gonna do, it wasn't just for me. And I thought that that's not too bad. If it was $1,000, then I would, and it was only based on the numbers that we saw here, we still don't have the numbers. I still don't know what my taxes are going up, so I may complain when I see that,
So, I hear your comment. So today we are only talking about the portion that we can control, and the average is about 174. It's gonna be higher for some homes,
Yes, I
and it
know.
might be a little bit lower for some homes. And we won't know that, so I expect that when people receive their property tax bills and everything's added on,
Well, what we don't do when we look at our taxes, our tax portion, and, this is typical, we don't look at how much hydro went up last year, and we don't look at how much gas went up last year, and we don't look at all these other costs that families are struggling with. And so I do think when good times are here, we have to try and keep it as low as we can because of all those other things. And you add up, accumulate all the different things that have gone up, like gas said, oh, we're not gonna go up, price of gas isn't going up, oh, but the price of transmitting it is. Shit, piping it, you know, like, and all these things. And I mean, I'm lucky because I can afford it. Boy, I know a lot of people that are hurting.
Okay, so I'm going to give it back to Christine. I know you've got a slide up here, but maybe I can also ask you to walk through the next steps in terms of approval of the bylaw.
Yes, so coming out of today, we were looking for a couple of key questions. Did you agree with the amendment to the financial plan for the water improvements? I heard yes. Any further amendments to 2017 to 2021 financial plan? So far I've heard no, over and above that one. Tax ratios approach is that we're going with the fixed rates. Any tax rate concessions for the port? I understand we're going with the 25 tax rate. Is that correct? I don't know if a resolution was passed on that or if we landed on that one.
Bringing it down to the average ratio.
So I think that was
So
a
do you-
tax rate of 25 and 22.5.
Do you need a resolution to that?
That would probably help, but it's, again, resolutions don't do anything when a bylaw is required. So, but you're giving me direction to bring the bylaw back to you in a certain way.
On that point, if we tax the port, if the number was 25 instead of 27.5, what does that do to any other class 4 property that comes along? Or is that specific to the port?
So that's a great question. My understanding is we would still be able to set major industry at a different rate than the port. The Property Port Tax Act specifically allows us to set the port rates differently from other class 4 properties. Having said that, I don't know what perception it sends or what other.
So maybe this is where a motion will be handy so that we can put this in context, that according, you know, in recognition of the port's increased assessment and the permission under the Port Authority Act, we are going to temporarily reduce the port's tax ratio,
Capped rate,
to
25,
25,
with improvements still at the legally required 22.5.
with the improvements at the legally required 22.5. And then, council, do we want to revisit this each year? They've asked for 2 years. Or do you want to come back and revisit this next year in? I don't know. They've asked for 2 years. I don't even know if we can do that.
Well, you can set policy around it. So yes, I guess you could set a policy to it, but it's totally up to council if you wanted to revisit next year.
My inclination is that we revisit.
So to frame, I don't know if we need to make the motion overly complicated. I think we just say, set the port rate at 25 and keep the class rate. Absolutely at 27.5, and we may want to increase that. We kept it there because it's the only thing in the class and it's the port cap, but it just doesn't actually meet with PC averages and stuff like that anyway. So, well, I think we want to be very specific to the port rate in the motion.
And that brings a good point. Right now, we don't set a major industry rate because we have nothing in the class. So it might be something council wants to consider philosophically if you want a deemed rate. Again, no property really coming in this year would normally be affected, so you'd have time to set it by next year, but given the unusual circumstance of our next potential major industry, it's something to consider.
I suppose I just want to make sure that council is recognizing some of the concerns around the table, is that the motion doesn't set a precedent, that there's a real reason in it that we acknowledge that in a motion so that it's clear to all of our taxpayers why we're doing this and that it doesn't extend to all industrial premise. So we can, I'm happy for someone to put forward a very simple motion. I saw your
Of extenuating circumstances, 2017, move that the port tax rate be reduced to 25 on just that one portion.
Seconded by Ted. Any discussion? Yeah.
And so that would do it to distinguish the port from something else
It would, but you don't have a major industry
at the
right,
moment.
right now.
But that is specific to the port.
I believe you had the port specifically indicated in there.
So, brings up the question, is it worthwhile just to differentiate? Can we do that within our rates? Put the port rate in there and put a heavy industrial rate in there and just, like, so we actually add that in this year so that we can actually start to look at that in and of itself.
You could do that, yes. You could set a rate for major industry today.
We don't necessarily have to today, but we could contemplate that.
Should we put a line out and just put the BC average in for this year?
Kind of as a starting point.
BC average, great.
That would probably be a separate motion.
Good. So let's just focus on the motion on the floor. Any other comments? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. So, does anybody want to put a motion forward to just add a line item? There won't be any revenue collected from it.
Yeah, we'll put a motion forward that we add a heavy industrial tax class. Would that be the right terminology? At the GC average, just so we're having two separate
Classes. Okay.
And can I clarify the 2016 BC average?
2016.
Sure. I don't think it's going to change too much.
Seconded by Peter.
Just for clarity, what was that number?
I think it was 31. Let me just pop it back up here so you have a look. Did I have the right one up there? No, sorry. BC average for major industry 31.41.
And that's just to have a placeholder.
Yeah. All right, any other comments? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Did we answer all your questions, Christine?
I believe we got through it all. Let me just make sure. Authorization, and we are authorized to proceed. So without being presumptuous, we did put the water amendment on the special meeting this afternoon. We would have pulled that off if you wanted to make further amendments to the financial plan. But it is there before you for the water amendments this afternoon to rescind it give third reading as amended, and then we will need to bring that back to the next council meeting to approve. Meanwhile, we'll prepare tax rate bylaws to come on the 18th and May 2nd. Is that okay with corporate office? Because that'll be a late agenda for us to get that bylaw in there. For the 18th? Is that okay?
They just ratified the motion to accept the water.
Any,
So you had some correspondence. I don't know, did you want to deal with that here?
I think the correspondence, and this probably maybe needed to be moved up, but it was from, it was about commercial and property tax rates and about keeping them lower in recognition.
Which they are.
And which I think we've done. So unless anyone wants to speak specifically to that.
No, we can send a letter certainly, but it does look to me like the Myers property will be going down in tax rate.
Perhaps we can direct Christine to respond to the letter about outlining the decision, and I think it's worthwhile to really keep an eye on the business and light industrial tax growth over the next couple of years, so we can really be mindful of where those ratios are going naturally as we grow the business tax base. I just want to make sure we're being cognizant of that over the next couple of years as more business space becomes available and more businesses hopefully plenty of that space.
So direct staff to proceed to respond to this letter.
So I can for sure. I wasn't 100% sure I understood. Is there a council direction with that ratio, or that we're just stabilizing ratios right now?
Well, I think, I just want to make sure every year we're going, last year we built 180,000 square feet of business space. And I just want to really be mindful of how the connection between economic growth and economic development is connecting to reducing overall taxes in that particular class. And light industrial too. Right. Carrie? I think Carrie's moving frantically behind you, I'm not sure.
Oh, sorry. That's okay. Did you make a decision on whether you wanted to revisit the port tax rate? How many years?
It's just for this year.
Just for this year. Thank you.
It wasn't in the motion, but
Yeah.
I think we're just considering it for 1 year.
It's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, on the business taxes over, recognizing that over a long period of time, we've basically raised our, it's that percentage thing, you know, that the percentages have gone up quite significantly for businesses. But in the absence of tax raises for a long period of time and actually collecting appropriate taxes to do infrastructure improvements and everything else, as long as we're keeping a stable rate, I think businesses will be happy. I think that most people were fearful of a massive tax raise because of their residential assessment. So that is, having been in business here for 20 years, I don't think it's, I think it's reasonable right now. And I am still mindful that we still do not have anything on the horizon as far as expanding businesses. We talk about it, we've tried to restrict land use. We still have a motion on Cleveland Avenue that restricts building on Cleveland Avenue. So we have no place to move office space. And yeah, you can roll your eyes, but it's true, having looked
We're a bit
for-
off topic, so.
No, Patty just spoke, it's not off topic.
We're just
Patty
talking about responding to this
letter that talks about taxes on Cleveland Avenue, and that talks about taxes on Cleveland Avenue. So if there's no place to build businesses, then we're not going to grow our tax base. So we have to be cognizant of that motion on the table.
That was,
Restricts, that still restricts building, and it's still out there for developers that they can't do anything, banks can't do anything as long as we have that motion on the table.
Here, let's go back to committee. Doug?
Yeah, thanks. And so, with respect, I disagree because I think there's the entire ocean front. We just had a DP application for what was 180,000 square feet of employment land. And there's land in the business park. And so what I hope will happen over the next few years is that our commercial and light industrial assessment base will grow. And I think what we have to keep in mind, I think this is what the mayor was saying, is that the burden, or the percent of the burden, doesn't get disproportionately dumped in one of those classes because they're expanding. And there may be room for it to increase because I think they're below the BC average, if I recall that slide, but we'll just have to kind of keep track of that.
Yeah.
I think that's, to me, it's like the earlier argument, you know, it's who actually bears the burden, and we want to keep that fair among the whole tax base.
Okay, so can we have a motion to refer this letter to staff?
Yes.
Did we?
sure, I'll move that.
Moved by Patty, seconded by Ted. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
And just very quickly, the intent of what I was trying to say is that we sometimes don't make the connection between land use decisions, economic development initiatives, growing the tax base and the effect on taxes, and that's what I want us to be mindful of.
It's a great comment.
Oh, keep it simple.
And I should have,
Okay, so there's no items under number 7 in terms of recommendations of historical council. Number 8 is our roundtable discussion. May, Christine and I are putting on the debrief for the whole budget process. Will be on the Finance and Audit Committee in May. Possibly something about how we're going to use surplus and sort of our philosophies around that. And we'll be introducing a standing item on the technology transformation project because finance is the first to go, and it may not have a topic each week, but there'll be a standing item there. So if Christine needs any or to update council,
On the fly questions of council.
it'll be there as well, since we'll be rolling that out this year. All right. Motion to terminate. Moved by Doug, seconded by Peter. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.